We're going to finish our application here with a few production grade improvements, like protected routes, a shared authentication state using React context, and at the end, we're going to add a user experience improvement where we're able to redirect the users back to the page that they got to the login page from. If the term context here is new, this is a built-in feature of React that allows you to have a shared value or a shared object that you can share across multiple components without using props drilling or without having to pass them one component to the next. So we'll create the context and the provider for it that will expose the isAuthenticated function, a login feature, and a logout feature as well. And we're going to use that to protect our settings page such that you can only get to the settings page if you've logged into the application. So the first thing I'll do here is I'll go into my newly created auth folder and I'll create an authentication context.js. And all what this would be is a new auth ctx or context that calls create context from React and provides a default value. And in our case, this default value is just going to be null. We'll save that and I'll go back and create another one that I'll call the authentication provider. This is a JSX file instead because we're going to be returning back a React component. And what a provider is basically the storage in which we're going to store our context in so that any component that is being wrapped by that provider can access the values in it. So over here, this is an authentication provider. And I'm going to start with a state that I'll call isAuthenticated or isAuth, and then set isAuth to use state, and the default value is going to be false. We can change that so it actually derives this from the local storage instead. So we're going to get item. We're going to call this item isAuth. And we're basically going to be checking if this value here equals 1. That's when it would be true. Otherwise, it'll be false. Next, we're going to create the function that we're going to be exposing, which is the login function. And what this will do is when you call it, we're going to set isAuth to 1. And we're also going to update the local storage, set item isAuth to equal 1. All right. And this is actually set isAuth. Here we go. Finally, similar to this, we're just going to create the logout function. And instead of setting the isAuthenticated to 0, we can just go ahead and remove the item altogether. So remove item isAuth and set the isAuthenticated here to false. So this technically should be true and that should be false. All right, so these are all the functions or all the properties and functions that we want to expose out of that provider. So let's go ahead and do that. Return. We'll import the authentication provider, or actually the authentication context, ctx.provider. And let's just make sure this is being exposed. Maybe I need to rename it so it's uppercased. And I'll come back over here. Let's just do it again. Auth context.provider, where the value is going to be the value of isAuth, the login function, and the logout function. Now, the provider is going to be wrapping other components. So those components are going to be passed in as children, and they're going to be passed right over here. All right, what is the problem here? Oh, just need it to be wrapped. Why? Oh, I need to wrap this in curly brackets instead, so it's being returned as an object. All right, so now we have our context and we have our provider. I'm gonna also go ahead and create another file that I will call the use auth hook. This is basically what's gonna allow us to access the functionalities and the properties of this provider or of this context in our components. So we'll go ahead and create that, and we'll export the function that we're gonna call use auth, and we're gonna import the context or auth context using use context, which is a function from React. And we're gonna have to pass in whatever that context is, which is our auth context import. Now, this should only be available if we're calling this function from within a provider. So if you call this from any component that is not wrapped by this provider, you should throw an error. And we're gonna do this by basically saying if there is no authentication context, then we need to return or throw a new error that basically reads, you should only access this hook from within the authentication provider. If there was a context, then we just need to return it so that we're able to use it in our code. All right, now we're almost ready to use this. So I'll go ahead and create a new component that I will call require auth.jsx. And what we want this component to be is basically to be a wrapper around our routes so that it checks if you're authenticated, and if you're not, it basically redirects you to the login page. Otherwise, it will log you in or it will pass you over to the correct component. So we'll do export function require authentication, and we're gonna use our use auth hook right here. So we're gonna call use auth, and we're gonna get the is authenticated value from this context. We did not import this. Here we go. And now we'll check if is auth is true, then, or if it's not true, then we're gonna return navigate to, and we're gonna pass in the login route. Now note we have not created that route or that component just yet. And here we go. We also did not properly import this navigate component, so let's just go ahead and get that from our React router DOM, and we'll save. So if you're not authenticated, we're gonna redirect you, or we're gonna navigate to the login page. Otherwise, we're gonna render whatever the children object is. So remove this, and we'll capture the children property here. Now we're gonna go ahead into the pages, and let's create a new component that we're gonna call login page.jsx. And this is a simple component that I'm not gonna waste your time creating. So basically it will get the login function from our use auth hook, and it will capture the navigate function from there. If you click on the login, or if you click on the sign in button here, it will call the login function from our hook, and then it will navigate to the root of our application. And that's all that is. So now we're gonna go into the main.jsx file, and let's create a new route for that. So here we have the path of /login should take us to the element that is the login page. And we forgot the comma here. We save it, refresh. All should be good. Looks like I do have an error somewhere. Let's see what we have. Okay, it says that the requested module auth context does not provide an export called use auth. So let's go ahead and fix this right here, because the use auth actually comes from the use auth file, not from this other file. We save, refresh. Okay, we're back in business. So now I'll go back to the main.jsx file, and now I want to wrap my settings page with the required authentication component, which basically will check if I am authenticated, then it will take me to the settings page. Otherwise, it will throw me back to the login page. So the way to use this is by basically calling require auth and wrapping my settings page with it. So let's just take this wrapper here and put it after the settings. Save that, and here's basically what the settings page would look like. So now we see an error on the side here that basically says you should only access this hook from within the auth provider. That is the error that we created. And the reason we're getting this right now is that we did not actually wrap our settings page or our routers all together with the authentication provider. So we're gonna go down to the render and we're gonna wrap our router provider here with our authentication provider. And we'll take this and put it beneath or underneath the router provider. Okay, here we go. We're no longer getting that error. So if I go to the home, it'll take me to the home page, about, events. But if I try to go to the settings, it will direct me to the login page instead. Now, technically our login page is done. And so if I click on this button right here, it will actually authenticate me. And let me go to the application viewer here just so we can see it. If I click the sign in button, it sets the that's the new key that I'm using, is auth. It sets that to 1 and then redirect me to the home page. Now, if I try to go to the settings page again, it actually takes me to the settings page because I am already authenticated. Now we're down to the last improvement that we want to do, which is basically if I hit the login page, I need to be redirected back to the settings page, not to the home page. That's kind of an annoying thing that we have to do, is after I've logged in, it takes me to kind of like the landing page of the website rather than the page that I intended to go to. So what we'll do now is I'll go into the required auth file and we're going to capture a new property called the location, and we'll get this from the use location hook from the React router DOM, which if we're trying to really understand what that is that if I go to this page right here, we already know that the current landing page or the current location is the /settings. So what we're going to do now is capture this value and pass it over to the state of my navigation so that from the login page, I'm able to know what was the page that I came from so that after the login, I get redirected to it again. So we're going to pass this location to a property called from, and we'll go ahead and save that. I'll now go back to the login page, and over here, instead of sending the user back to the landing page, I'm going to send them to the page that they came from. Again, I'll use the use location hook to capture the state of where we came from. Location equals use location, and the property of the state, which we called it from, is going to be location dot state dot from dot path name. And if you don't get anything, just take us back to the landing page. So over here, instead of navigating to this, we'll navigate to whatever from value is. Let's save and try this again. I'll clear out the local storage. So if I refresh and go to the home, about, events, settings, we get to the login page. So now if I click sign in, I get authenticated and redirected into the settings page rather than the home page. So we've used the context to share our authentication state across our application using an authentication provider. We use the required auth wrapper here to protect our routes that we want to make sure that the user is authenticated before they get to. And we finally captured where the user was navigating to the login page from so that we can send them to the page that they actually were intending to go to rather than the home page. And with that, we're going to wrap up our campus events. And now we know how to use React Router to build navigation in our applications.